He was just a kid with broken radios and a dream. But when the system framed him for a crime he didn't commit, he didn't break. He rewired everything. In a forgotten corner of Alabama, where dirt roads carved through silence and dreams often rusted like the old trucks left behind, a boy named Jalen Carter was born into a world that had already made up its mind about him. He didn't cry much as a baby. He watched. While other kids ran barefoot through backyards chasing sunlight, Jalen sat cross-legged in the shade of broken porches, holding dead radios in his lap. His hands were small but steady. His eyes, quiet, calculating. He didn't see garbage. He saw logic, pathways, answers hiding behind screws and rust. His mother, a house cleaner with calloused hands and a tired spine, raised him and his younger brother alone. There were no luxuries, not even second chances. Just bills, long hours, and the unspoken rule of survival. Keep your head down, keep moving. But Jalen's head was always tilted upward, listening. He would take apart anything thrown away. A cracked remote, a burnt motherboard, a discarded keyboard missing half the letters. They weren't useless to him. They were puzzles, challenges, lessons whispered in static. By 10, he was fixing neighbors' old remotes for coins. By 14, he'd written his first computer program on a machine he'd built from trash. Not because someone taught him, but because he had to understand. The world didn't leave space for boys like Jalen to waste time dreaming. But knowledge, that was different. That was power. And yet, no matter how much he learned, no matter how sharp his mind became, he was invisible. In school, teachers saw him as just another quiet black boy who didn't make trouble. In stores, security guards followed him like a shadow. On buses, people held their bags tighter when he passed. He noticed. He always noticed. But he never complained. He coded. Late at night, at 18, he enrolled in a free night program in a technical school. Not for glory, not for escape, just for a job, a chance, a crack in the wall. He dreamed of becoming a junior programmer, maybe even moving to a city, working for a real company. Something simple, something honest. But the world doesn't reward quiet genius. Not when it's wrapped in brown skin and walks home alone with a backpack. And one night, just one night, was all it took to erase everything he thought he was building. It was raining that night, but softly. Not the kind that floods, but the kind that blurs streetlights and makes time feel slower. Jalen was walking home. Same path as always. Head down, hands in pockets, tired after class. He was thinking about a bug in his code, something he wanted to fix before bed. Nothing unusual. Then, a siren, a scream, shouting, running footsteps on wet concrete. He froze. A store down the street had been broken into. The window shattered. Someone fled, a blur in a hoodie, lost in the night. Jalen wasn't running. He didn't even stop walking. But in that moment, his presence, his silhouette, his skin was all that mattered. Minutes later, red and blue lights sliced through the darkness. Officers shouted. Guns were drawn. He raised his hands, slowly, calmly. But calm didn't matter. They said he matched the description. Black, male, slim build, wearing a hoodie, carrying a backpack. No fingerprints, no stolen goods, no direct witnesses. But there was a new system in place. A private surveillance company had just installed facial recognition technology around the city. The software claimed it was 87% confident that Jalen was the suspect. That was enough. He was arrested on the spot. No phone call. No questions that mattered. Just the cold metal of handcuffs against his wrists. At trial, the defense argued there was no real evidence. The prosecutor didn't need any. They had the software, the science, and a jury trained for decades to trust machines more than black boys. Jalen was sentenced to 8 years in prison. 8. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just stood there, like someone watching their own life close behind glass. The world had taken everything. Not with violence, not with fire, but with indifference. Quiet, calculated, digital indifference. The boy who once listened to wires was now locked behind them. Prison was never just a place. It was a silence that tried to rewrite you. A cold routine designed to erase the person you were. Jalen didn't talk for weeks. He ate without tasting, slept without dreaming, walked in circles. Every noise, the clank of metal doors, the shouting, the keys, became part of a rhythm he refused to move with. They called him Ghost, not because he was feared, but because he was already disappearing. But in solitude, something survived. Not rage, not hope, not even revenge, curiosity. It whispered to him in the quiet. Why? How? What if the machine was wrong? It started small. He watched. He listened. He studied guards, patterns, routines. Then, one afternoon, a rumor reached him. An old man in Block D, a former professor, said to be brilliant, said to be broken. Jalen found him. White hair, tired eyes, books stacked like barricades around his bunk. The man didn't smile. He didn't welcome. But he saw something in Jalen, something that didn't belong there. They traded silence first, then thoughts, then secrets. The professor had been convicted of white-collar crime, fraud. But he claimed innocence, said he had tried to expose a system and was punished for it. Together, in a prison no one watched, they built something rare, a classroom of two minds, on borrowed time. Jalen learned encryption, data theory, then legal codes, case law, AI training data. The prison library became his universe, the dusty computer lab, his laboratory. He learned that the recognition software used in his case was proprietary, protected, closed, but flawed. Worse, it had a pattern, one the system didn't want anyone to see. It failed most often on faces like his. It started with one line of code, buried deep in the algorithm, a number, a threshold, a margin of error. That changed depending on the color of the face. Jalen stared at it for hours. He wasn't supposed to see it. He wasn't supposed to understand it. But he did. The system that claimed he was 87% likely to be the suspect had a 40% error rate for black men. 40%. And yet, in court, it was treated as fact. Objective, scientific, absolute. Jalen felt something shift inside him. Not anger, not yet. First, it was disbelief, then clarity, then fire. He dove deeper. Lines of code became weapons. Old cases became clues. And bit by bit, he mapped it all. A private company had sold this flawed technology to dozens of small towns, mostly poor, mostly black. It came packaged with promises, fewer crimes, faster arrests, but no one asked who paid the price. Jalen traced internal memos, legal shortcuts. He saw how cities received funding for using the software, how incarceration fed the contracts. It wasn't broken, it was designed that way. Prison wasn't just a punishment, it was a business. And Jalen was product. Still, no one was listening. He had no internet, no voice, only access to a few outdated machines and one man who believed in him. So, he got creative. He encoded his findings inside legal letters, buried stats in innocent-looking documents. He wrote everything in layers, like a cipher, hiding truth in plain sight. Then, through back channels, he sent them to legal clinics, civil rights groups, tech watchdogs, and waited. For months, nothing happened. Until one day, a whisper returned. A journalist wrote back, "I don't know who you are." But this changes everything. At first, it was just a blog post, buried under opinion pieces and sports scores. No name, no photo, just truth. The code that convicts the wrong man. It read. A quiet ripple in an ocean of noise. But someone read it. Then another, then a lawyer, then a judge. Jalen watched from his cell as whispers turned into questions. Interviews, inquiries, leaks. The documents he had buried in dry language were now being pulled apart, analyzed, exposed. He heard the guards mutter about the news. He caught glimpses on old newspapers in the cafeteria. His words, the words he'd coded in desperation, were finally living outside. And yet, no one knew it was him. Not yet. They called him the Ghost Coder, an anonymous inmate with impossible knowledge and inconvenient truth. Jalen didn't care about the credit. He cared about the cracks. The cracks in the system he'd exposed, and how, through them, light was finally getting in. He doubled down, sent more letters, sharpened the data. He knew which officials had signed the contracts. He traced connections to private prison investors. He identified counties with the highest false positive rates, all backed with math, all indisputable. Soon, the Department of Justice had no choice but to investigate. Committees were formed, audits launched, and one name began to appear. His, Jalen Carter. No longer just a number, no longer just a case, a symbol, a mirror held up to a system designed to stay unchallenged. And while journalists begged for an interview, while politicians debated, while protests erupted outside, Jalen sat in the same dim room, staring at the same old machine. He didn't celebrate. He didn't even smile. He just whispered one word under his breath. Continue. It was a gray morning when the warden called him in. No cuffs, no shouting, just silence, and a folded suit. "Put this on," the man said. Jalen blinked. His hands trembled slightly as he touched the collar. He hadn't worn real clothes in years. A black car waited outside. Not the back seat, not a squad escort. The front, passenger side. As if he were someone. The ride was long, through small towns and silent stretches of road. He didn't ask where they were going. He didn't need to, because the closer they got to the city, the louder the world became. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Signs, cameras, chants. He saw one that read, "Set the system free. Free Jalen Carter." Another, "The algorithm lied. He was no longer a ghost." Inside, the room fell quiet as he entered. Journalists froze. Judges adjusted their robes. Activists held their breath. There he stood, not in shackles, not in shame, but in strength. He took the microphone, cleared his throat, and for the first time, he spoke. "I was never the threat," he said, "but I was always the target." He told them everything. The data, the corruption, the manipulation of fear. He spoke like a man who'd waited years, not for revenge, but for the right to be heard. His voice didn't shake. His facts didn't falter. He didn't point fingers. He drew a map. And at the end, he looked straight into the cameras and said, "I'm not here because I was saved. I'm here because I learned how to fight the system, using the very code it tried to bury me with." There was silence. Then, applause, tears, and something deeper. Recognition. Jalen Carter, the boy they tried to erase, had become the man they couldn't ignore. Freedom came, quietly. No parades, no medals, just air, real air without fences around it. Jalen stood outside the courthouse, the sky heavy with clouds, the city humming like a machine he could finally touch. People cheered. Some tried to hug him. Others asked for selfies. But Jalen just looked up, as if trying to remember what the sky had looked like before everything broke. A senator offered him a check, $2 million. Restitution, they called it. He refused, because he hadn't spent years learning how the system worked just to take a payout and disappear. Instead, he asked for something different, an old warehouse on the east side, abandoned, forgotten, like he once was. They gave it to him, not because they believed in the idea, but because they didn't want another headline. What they didn't know was that Jalen already had the blueprint. Within months, walls were rebuilt, wires reconnected, broken screens lit up again. And on a warm morning, just after sunrise, he opened the doors. Inside, 20 worn-down computers, rows of second-hand chairs, a whiteboard covered in diagrams. But more importantly, children. Kids from the same streets he came from. Some quiet, some angry. All of them brilliant. He didn't teach them to code just to get jobs. He taught them to decode the world, to question systems, to understand laws, logic, and language, and, most of all, to see themselves as more than statistics. He called it Project Signal, because in a world full of noise, some voices deserve to be heard crystal clear. Years passed. The world moved on. But Jalen Carter's name lingered, not as a symbol of victimhood, but as a reminder. The power of a single mind to unravel the web of a broken system. His project, Signal, expanded. Children, once forgotten, now led workshops. They taught others. And from every corner of the country, new networks were born, connected through code, through knowledge, and through the unyielding belief that they too could rewrite their story. The world did not change overnight, but it changed in small, deliberate ways. With every line of code written, every injustice exposed, every life reclaimed. Jalen stood on a stage once again, years after his release, not as a man seeking redemption, but as one who had already forged it in the fires of his past. And as he spoke to a crowd of young minds, so full of potential, he wasn't just talking about technology. He was talking about freedom, about purpose, about the unseen power inside each person waiting to break free. This isn't just about hacking systems, he said, voice steady, eyes shining with quiet certainty. This is about hacking your life, reprogramming your mind, and understanding that the world doesn't define you. You define the world. And as the last words echoed, a wave of realization washed over the room. Not just in Jalen's eyes, but in every face before him. They had understood the message, the truth that had carried him through his darkest days. Jalen had become more than just a survivor of an unjust system. He had become a force of change, a mentor, a voice for those who would never be silenced again. And as he left the stage, the crowd still buzzing with energy, he stepped outside into the crisp air of the evening. He looked up at the stars, flickering in the vast sky. He had done what he set out to do. Not for glory, not for fame, but to prove that in the darkest of places, even the smallest spark could light up the world. If Jalen's journey moved you, like, subscribe, and share this story. because, in the end, true freedom begins when we raise our voice against injustice, and silence should never be an option. Bye-bye.